it's Shocker. Welcome to my breakdown of patch 81. Major changes. High Roller now has Fog of War. I believe they held off on adding Fog of War in order to not overload the community with the massive changes to HR from the previous patch. I believe this was their goal with HR, and now their vision's fully rolled out. I know a lot of people are upset with this, but this does make the most sense thematically, and I think this is here to stay, for better or for worse. Arena gear loss has been removed, so feel free to buy BIS and run it. Minimap has been buffed with the Discovery of H being doubled. You now get just enough glimpse to have a good chance of predicting the next module without opening the door to that module, which is definitely nice, especially in Inferno. During the last week of the wipe, Arena will allow uniques and artifacts, which I believe will be timed with the gear loss removal, so you'll be able to simply buy artifacts and run them with no risk. Many people have rumored this, and so the rumors were true. I'm very excited for this. This will likely mean that there won't be multi-class this season, which would have been kind of crazy with Sorcerer release. And lastly, menu brightness has been locked at the darkest setting regardless of the brightness setting you have set. This affects the menu, but also affects the UI in-game. So it's going to be harder to see information, but it will look clearer, kind of. I think this is definitely a nerf. I don't like this change, personally. Maps and PvE. PvE damage. Element weakness and strength calculation added to mobs, mostly buffing caster damage. So fire damage against ice mobs, evil damage being weak against goblins, lightning damage being strong against wisps, but physical damage being weak against wisps. Things like that. There's a whole list. I recommend checking out OnePeg's video on details on this. Crypts, HR Fishing Grounds now gets way more exits. Many times I've been in Fishing Grounds in HR and there would be no way out and no way connecting to other modules. Now it actually connects just like in Norms, so that's definitely a buff. Definitely nice. Inferno lowered spawn density in some modules. They say changed, but it's been lowered in some places. I think this is healthy. I think Inferno was a little overloaded on the new modules. Added more golden chests, which makes hell a little bit more rewarding. I think that's also good. Mountain mob density has been also adjusted, which I imagine is the same, also lowered, which is also, I think, pretty good. There's a couple fixes. The Abyss Dividing Hill is the south module in Abyss. Spider spawn has been adjusted, I imagine, to make sure that the spider is always present on the left side of the module. In Crypts, Center Bridge, the one with the Res Shrine on one side and the triple portals on the other, and Skeleton Champ and Wraith behind double doors. Skeleton Champ could get stuck on the jail door, now it should no longer get stuck there anymore, which is a fine fix. Goblin Mage, there was a bug where the bolt from Goblin Mage would linger in the air and jitter around, bugging out. They've supposedly fixed that. Boss buffs. Supposedly Ghost King no longer takes the bait on the Hydra during his suck ability, what I imagine this is. And then Banshee supposedly had lower action speed the more living players are in the room with her, so they fixed that, which I have noticed. I would say it was like a 15% action speed nerf per player. Abyss, again the Dividing Hill is the south module. Wendigo lever is no longer accessible without breaking ice. You could stand on the floor roaster and reach the lever. Supposedly you can no longer do that. And the Wendigo in that module supposedly can now hit players behind the chest, which is actually a huge nerf to being able to clear the Wendigo in that chest in that room. Alright, Druid. Lightbloom Aura's healing tick has been halved from 2 to 1. Massive nerf. I think this is a very fair change, but I don't think it will kill Lightbloom. I think Lightbloom will still stick around because of just how powerful it is. But it's a pretty hefty nerf. And Dreamwalk now procs when taking map damage, which is the normal ticks and norms, and the zone in HR. This is honestly just really frustrating to deal with because Dreamwalking interrupts any interaction you do, so you have to time your interactions around getting hit with the dot. I don't think people will take off Dreamwalk just to avoid this problem. It's just a massive frustration and sore point. I think it's a bad idea to do this. On to buffs. Druid's Restore spells tier has been moved down from 5 to 3, making it 2 ticks less to recharge when setting normally and -2 memory cost. This is a fantastic buff to Restorer. I think that's fair, and having Restore be that hard to get back I think was kind of strange. I think this is really fair. Restore cast time reduced by 0.25 seconds from 1.75 to 1.5. Nice little quality of life. And Dreamfire now properly scales with number of targets. Before, even if you would hit 2 or 3 multiple, it wouldn't scale up the heal, but now it does. On to nerfs. Orb of Nature's spell count down by 1 to 4 now. Entangling Vines, spell count down from 3 to 2. Now it takes 0.75 seconds to materialize from 0, so it's no longer an instant route. And the duration is halved from 6 seconds to 3 seconds. I think this is fair. The duration didn't really matter that much since it wasn't that big anyway. It was mostly a door, I guess, block, which you'll see that these are mostly door block nerfs. Thorn Barrier, duration reduced from 8 seconds to 4 seconds, and the spell count reduced from 3 to 2. Another nerf to door control. Even though Thorn Barrier can be crouch jumped, it still is quite frustrating to deal with. If you screw up the jump and you bounce on the barrier, it can definitely make for a hard time dealing with the doorways. And lastly, Bark Skin, armor cast time reduced. Oh, that's a buff. And spell count reduced from 5 to 4, which I guess makes it a little bit of a quality of life buff to casting this on yourself. Bark Skin definitely felt like it took way too long to cast to yourself compared to the volume that you get out of this spell, especially as a preparatory spell before going in. And the spell count going down, I don't think that's going to matter very much. But Thorn Barrier's duration, Tangled Vines duration makes it a little bit more tight of a window of usage and really makes it much more of a caster druid focused use than someone going 5 spell and the forms. So it's pushing these abilities to be more useful on someone on a druid with knowledge rather than one without. Overall, I think this is helping keep druid a little bit more fair compared to other classes, when compared to clerics who go 10 spell, and just overall power of druid has always been very high, so I think these nerfs are all just fine. I don't think they're game changing, but they're just welcome. Alright, on to Sorcerer. Massive nerf. Each tier of spells now adds an extra second. It used to be that you multiply the tier of the spell by 3 and you get the cooldown. So tier 1 would be 3 seconds, tier 2 would be 6 seconds. Now tier 1 is 4 seconds, tier 2 is 8 seconds, and it's 4 seconds per tier, which is a massive nerf to cooldowns. Second massive nerf, time distortion cast time reduction has been nerfed from instacast to 75% reduction. Oh, and the cooldowns downside. This means that these two changes combined make it so the flat cooldowns at the end of the calculation will stay the same. So this is not a buff to time distort because the end result is the same because of the massive nerf to the base cooldowns of the abilities. Things like spell sculpting are nerfed as well because now that plus 25% to cooldowns is going to be bigger because it's multiplying from 4 seconds instead of 3 per spell tier. So this is definitely a major nerf, and this is a net negative overall when it comes to cooldowns, on top of the fact that we lose instacast. This is a horrible, horrible change. Now, supposedly the no instacast is balanced out by the buffs to how long the cast times are in abilities. I sorted these based on the popularity and strength of spells overall. The following spells have the cast time decreased by 0.75 seconds. Wind Blast, Vortex, Lightning Bolt, Fire Orb, Lightning Sphere, Glaciate, and Stone Skin. Lightning Sphere being special because its tier went down, so it's -4 or old -3 seconds on the cooldown for Lightning Sphere. That's actually really nice. And Wind Blast Vortex cast times going down this low is also extremely nice, especially on the Wind Blast being only 1.5 seconds before, going down to 0.75 is a pretty big deal. Moving on to spells that had -0.5 seconds cast time. Fire Arrow, Water Bolt, Ice Spear, Flame Strike, and Eruption. And lastly, Levitation and Earth Elemental got -0.75 seconds and -1 second with a tier reduction on these as well. Next, Icebound now has an additional ability of improving your cooldown reduction by 50% flat while icebound, which is pretty nice. This makes your abilities come back quicker while you are in icebound form. And there was a fix where sitting no longer desyncs the cooldown on the UI. It used to be when you would sit and then you would get up, sometimes the cooldown would be like, oh, it's 0 now, even though it looks like there's 3 seconds. So it would jump from 3 seconds left on the cooldown to it's ready, which was weird. Now I know what that was. It was because the UI wouldn't sync up when you're sitting, because sitting and camping actually lowers your cooldowns faster than just standing. So they made sure now the UI reflects this properly, which is nice. And another nerf, missing a spell doesn't proc mana flow. So if you're casting a spell that requires aiming at the ground, and when you release the spell, you are no longer aiming at the ground and the spell is consumed, that will no longer proc mana flow to give you a stack or remove all of your stacks, which is technically a nerf, but it might even be a buff in some cases when you mess up. Really depends on how you look at it. I tried playing without time distort. I would say that the changes are making Knowledge Sorc viable, but it's still not worth going knowledge, even with these changes. And it still feels just a million times better to have instacast than to not. The problem with Sorcerer is that you are slowed so much when going through the animations of casting abilities. So these 0.75 seconds and 1 second cast times, even when they're lowered by knowledge, even when they're lowered by manifold, having to be slowed for that duration versus being slowed for 0 seconds and then having action speed up the action speed part is just so invaluable for your mobility. And the buff of move speed you get not having to deal with these cast times is so insanely OP compared to having to deal with them when it comes to mobility, that even with these changes, time distort is just better. Even if it's not instacast, I would still say it's a must have. But I'm glad that they're trying to make Spell Cylinder better, and I'm glad that they're trying to make the class less clunky to play. The frustrating part is that cooldowns are just so long. Time distortion feels like you have to play it, but it feels bad that you have to play it because no one wants to deal with these long cooldowns. Thankfully, we have Elemental Fury still, and it hasn't been affected. Thankfully, we still have Air Mastery to help create space to make up for the fact that we're constantly slowed by having to go through all these animations, but I still think there's room for improvement. And next we have just a couple more changes. Fighter breakthrough duration has been reduced from 12 seconds to 8 seconds. That's the one where you're no longer slowed by things. I think this is a healthy choice. 12 seconds seem just really insanely long, especially with the 7 move speed that you gain with breakthrough for 12 seconds. Pretty wild. Now it's 8. I think that's fair. I don't think that makes a big difference, but it, makes breakthrough not as brain dumb to activate super early. Cleric buff, Divine Protection duration increased from 4 seconds to 6 seconds. This is absolutely massive, I think. Divine Protection is so OP. Having it for 6 seconds really helps it stay around for the entirety of the fight. Especially with Will, this will be going up from like 6 to 7 to like 10 to 12 here with Goodwill. And technically a nerf, but I think this is kind of really nice. Now the range size of Locust Swarm is outlined visually. You can see an outline in a little bit of like almost sphere kind of like shape over Locust Swarm to indicate when you are in it versus not. It's way more clear if you're inside Locust Swarm or if you're in the clear of the ability. Good change. Next, gear. Big change to gear that had magic resist that didn't have any main stats in it. The change is that there's minus 30 MR on him, but they get a main stat. At poor quality, it's 1. At common, uncommon, and rare, it's 2. At epic and legendary, it's 3. And at artifact or unique, it is 4. On runestone, you get strength, which is fantastic. Darkblade armor gives you vigor, which is kind of nice. Ornate Jazzerant gives you dex, which is actually awesome. I really like that. Definitely great for bards. Dark leather leggings now get dex, which is also great. Makes them a nicer, way better alternative to cloth pants than they used to be when they just didn't have a base that it kind of sucked to take them. Dashing boots now have agi, which is, kind of nice, but I almost feel like dashing boots with no agi with the MR would have been probably better, but you get some agi. These are really nice and welcome because putting on all this MR with these gear would just make magic damage just literally dead, especially with barbarians still having 75 magic resist with Iron Will. It's crazy. This is the first step kind of towards helping the casters a little bit, compensating for those changes. Stinky Stick has been fixed so that the cloud now does damage even if the weapon is stowed. The clouds that the Stinky Stick spawns, and Stinky Stick should properly protect you from clouds created by other players that have a Stinky Stick or by zombies. So supposedly that's been fixed. Okay, next we'll be going to talk about Arena. There are new modules in Arena. The matchmaking MMR disparity tolerance has been decreased So the max difference between the highest and lowest player when matching up is 390, which I think will make for a much healthier and fair matchmaking experience. And MMR calculations have been improved to just better match that up when it comes to the team scores and some details around that. Improvements to some arena modules. Imagine that's the lighting that's been changed in some of them. Maybe it's something else, not sure. And lastly, other changes. The ranked rewards for the AP grind of Season 5 has been revealed. The Torch and Sid emote are pretty cool, but the Demigod reward, apparently, I thought it was going to be a Sash skin, but it's a damn emote, which is wild to me. Maybe there'll be something super crazy with that, but it just doesn't look like anything crazy. They did make the Demigod grind literally free, patch 80.2, so I guess this is what we get with that. And moving on to some dates. Ranked in Religion will end on April 3rd. Arena Season 3 is running right now until March 31st, which means that uniques and artifacts will be available right after that Season 3 ends. And lastly, a fix where sometimes you would select a server that you want to play in, but then it would just jump and change to a completely different server. I've been thrown into Sao Paulo servers, even though I didn't select it randomly before, so this supposedly fixed that problem. So the TLDR, big change to HRs with the Fog of War being added. I don't think most people don't like this change, but I think unfortunately this is here to stay. Arena gear loss has been removed. Fog of War discovery range increased, so you get a glimpse, maybe enough to figure out what the module is behind the door without having to open the doors. Arena will allow artifacts and uniques in April, and menu brightness is now locked at dark. It's not you, it's the game, and you can't fix it. PvE has been improved to casters by making elements deal more damage to different types of mobs in intuitive ways. Lowered spawn density in Hell and on the mountain map. Fixed some cheese spots here and here, as well as Warlock Hydra cheesing of Ghost King's suck ability. Druid Life Bloom now grants 1 HP per tick instead of 2. Dreamwalk procs on map tick damage, but Life Bloom is getting some love for knowledge builders and a little bit of nerf to non-Life Bloom users trying to run CC spells. But I think people will just use Trent instead because it's just better than most of the stuff. Sorc Time Distort is no longer instacast, and despite what it says here, cooldowns are going to stay the same, but without Time Distort, cooldowns are worse. So massive nerfs. Casting without Time Distort feels a little better, but it's still better to just take Time Distort. And a couple changes to Fighter and Cleric. Locust Swarm should now be much easier to tell if you're in it or not. Gear that had MR stats but no base stats now have base stats. Here's the list. A couple Stinky Stick bug fixes. Arena matchmaking improved dramatically by making sure there's no drastic differences between the MMR of players on different teams. Ranked rewards, Demigod got an emote, lol. Season ends on April 3rd, and Arena Season 3 is now running until April, and in April the uniques and artifacts are allowed, and fixed an issue where the wrong server was selected. Leave a like if you found this helpful. Let me know what you think of the patch in the comments, and subscribe and hit the notification bell so you know when the next video is out. That's all, and see you in the dungeons.